Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff.
I'm Alex.
As always, thank you for downloading, listening, liking, and commenting on our podcast videos. Please join our community by subscribing to us on the socials. Our handle on all platforms is at N2E Fantasy. We're also available on all major podcasting apps by searching N2E Fantasy. Alex, what do we have on today's show?
On this episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, we are recapping all Week 11 action of the NFL season, and we will go game by game, just talk about some of the points that we like. But first, a little league news here. So, Jeff, it just broke today that the Jets fired their general manager, Joe Douglas.
Yeah, I mean it's quite shocking how much change the Jets have went through in the regular season here, and we're only at week 11. They've acquired Devontae Adams, they fired Robert Saleh, they fired their GM, they've traded Mike Williams. So it does seem like they're trying to place blame on this season versus taking responsibility and trying to figure out what to do different to potentially get a different result. And that's never going to work.
Yeah, I definitely didn't feel like Douglas was the problem there. He had one of the best drafts not too long ago where he got Sauce Gardner and he got defensive end Johnson and Brees Hall all in the same class, and now he's gone. I feel like Rodgers is definitely the problem here, and we just saw Diana Rossini post that Woody Johnson was trying to have Rodgers benched after they lost to the Broncos. Felt like he was the problem. Do you agree that Rodgers might have been the issue there, or what do you think about that news blurb coming out?
So, regardless of how I feel about Rodgers and Rodgers' play, I don't believe Rodgers has been bad enough to bench this year. And the witch hunt that Woody Johnson is going on right now is not good for morale in the locker room. It's not good for morale with the coaches. It's not what a winning team does, and it starts from up top, and he's just not doing very well right now, and the owner needs to quit meddling before he ruins this team. If you remember correctly, Robert Saleh was fired when they were one game out of first place, playing the Bills for first place. And yeah, like if there's premature and then there's this is way beyond premature. This is like it's really jumping the gun here. So, and he's doing it every week at this point, and there's changes every week. So I couldn't work or exist in that culture. So I can't imagine how these players feel working and existing in this culture right now.
The Jets are currently 20th in points scored per game, 26th in yards per game, 18th in passing yards per game, 30th in rushing yards per game, 24th in time of possession per game. So nothing's going right for this offense. This defense started off pretty good when Saleh was there, and the defense, I feel like, has fallen apart since he's left. So to me, it's more coaching than talent because I feel like this roster is pretty talented. Might be a little weak on the offensive line, but I think some of that's coaching, and they don't have an offensive guy to really turn this team around. And part of the problem is Aaron Rodgers just brought in his buddies and seems like he wouldn't work with another offensive minded coach that didn't do what he told him to do. So maybe benching Rodgers would have helped a little bit, but it wouldn't have got them into the playoffs regardless. I think this is a team without a real identity, and they don't have a real offense. They need an offensive mind to be brought in.
I completely agree, and I'm sure we'll spend more time in the off season discussing what coaching candidates that they could bring in and what they're going to do at the quarterback position going forward, because those are the two biggest question marks for 2025, right?
But we can move on to the other side of the city. The other team there, the New York Giants, have officially benched Daniel Jones, trying to avoid paying out some guaranteed money due to injury risk. And they have brought in their familiar name, Tommy DeVito, as the starter rather than the guy that they went out and got in the offseason, Drew Lock. What do you think they're doing here? Do you think Tommy is better than Drew Lock? Do you think they are tanking? Do you think Drew Lock just hasn't been good in practice? What do you think of this move?
So I think that Tommy DeVito is an interesting choice here because they skipped their backup, Drew Lock, and went to Tommy DeVito. So there's a couple things that could happen here. The coaching staff might know what they have in Drew Lock, decide that they don't like Drew Lock, and that he's not going to help them in the future. And Tommy DeVito here might actually be playing for his roster spot in 2025 as well. We can already assume Daniel Jones will be cut and gone. No one's trading for him. No one's trading for that contract. There's no guaranteed money, so there's no real reason for them to hold on to him either. So they will do that and take care of it. Drew Lock probably won't be there in 2025. Don't see a reason for him to be brought back at this point if they're not going to him this week. So Tommy DeVito, Danny DeVito's brother is
That was his son.
it's always sunny in Philadelphia. But he has a chance to be on the 2025 roster, at least as a backup quarterback. So I think this is a smart move, and it sparked them last year. And I think Brian Daboll is getting into the area of coaching for his job. Although, honestly, I don't believe that should be the case. I know these owners get impatient quickly. I think this falls squarely on the GM because the GM is the one that let Saquon Barkley get away and go to a rival and made the Giants have a ton of egg all over their face. So I just believe that Daniel Jones, bad decision by the GM. Saquon Barkley, bad decision by the GM. I just feel like there's a lot of bad GM decisions here that need to be rectified, and I don't know if that is a full indictment of the coaching that Brian Daboll has done.
Well, I certainly agree with you that the GM is terrible. Might be the worst GM in the entire league, and that's saying something considering how many bad teams there are right now. Maybe Joe Douglas should move across the street and go work for the Jets next, because I feel like he would bring in some good talent. Although he hasn't been able to find a quarterback either. The Giants, however, with Dable, it could be that Dable is not a good head coach. He seems to have friction with a lot of the coaching staff that he brings in. It always seems like he's arms against somebody on that coaching staff, and he hasn't been able to get Malik Neighbors going at this part of the year after early success with him. He hasn't been able to get Jalen Hyatt going. You can blame the quarterback play a little bit. You can blame offensive line play a little bit, but other coaches are managing something on offense in similar situations. So I think he's best as an offensive coordinator under a better head coach. I don't think he's destined to stay in this role. And I think that they should just start over come the offseason. Get a new quarterback, new head coach, new GM all at once. It's something similar that Chicago should have done this past offseason. They should have got a new offensive minded head coach when they drafted a quarterback. So we'll see. We'll see how that plays out. But I like Tommy DeVito a little bit more than Drew Lock. I liked Drew Lock earlier in his career a little bit, but he's never panned out.
Yeah, and there's still a chance that we could see Drew Lock down this stretch as well. So
It's true.
this isn't a permanent move, and it does sound like Daniel Jones is moving to the third string quarterback. So Drew Lock will be the backup here.
Yeah, there's a theme of these teams acquiring a better backup, like Drew Lock with the Giants and Trey Lance with the Cowboys, potentially being high upside players, and then the team's not using them. Probably going to have their contracts expire and they won't get compensation picks now because no one's going to pay them a huge amount of money.
That is correct. So there is a lot of dysfunction coming out of New York. The Jets in the AFC East and the Giants in the NFC East, which leads me to our Week 11 recap here. And we had a couple other NFC East teams kicking off the week on Thursday night, where we had the Commanders at the Eagles. And I know we just talked about this, Alex, but Barkley was the difference in this game. He took over the game in the second half, and the Giants GM let him go in the offseason, and that's why I believe that he should be fired, because he has the ability to take over a game like he did in the second half of a Thursday night game, where it didn't seem like either of these teams really wanted to be playing on Thursday night. And I think that was really evident with what Washington was doing at the end of the game. They were still running the ball inside 2 minutes, but down 2 scores. And they just didn't really play it to the point where they could be in comeback mode. So that really didn't sit well with me, watching Dan Quinn and the boys not be in hurry up, not trying to score, not trying to push the ball down the field. So that they kind of ate an L on purpose, it feels like, down the stretch there. But both quarterbacks struggled in this game on a short week. Jalen Hurts was getting popped left and right, so hopefully he's okay after this game. But Alex, you picked Philly and won, and I picked Washington and lost. So first win of the week for you, and I'm still sitting on the 0 here. So what were your notes from this game?
Austin Eckler is still very usable in fantasy. He had 8 catches for 89 yards out of the running back position. They played behind a little bit in the second half. So he's someone you could still fire up at least as a flex play each week. And I think that if you have Brian Robinson Jr., you should probably try to acquire him for insurance for playoffs as well.
Are
Other
you
than
hinting
that,
to me?
I would never hint to you live on a podcast. No, never. Yeah.
Oh boy.
But I also like Zach Ertz could have had another touchdown in this game. I mean, he had 6 catches, 47 yards, and a touchdown. He almost had another touchdown. He's defying age, and he wanted obviously to play well against his former team, the Eagles. The Eagles' defense was more the story of this one. The way they shut Washington out that second half was pretty impressive in combination with Barkley. Best way to win a game and control a game is through a really good run game and a really good defense. And Philly's looking like a team that might go pretty far in the postseason if they can keep this pace up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think both teams at this point are in driver's seat spots for the postseason, especially with the 49ers game that we'll get to a little bit later. I don't, we're running out of teams that could catch my 3 wild card spots in the NFC right now.
Yeah, we'll see if the Commanders can bounce back next week. But I think there's a chance the Commanders could falter as the season goes on. Now that their offense has been kind of figured out a little bit, and Cliff
Yeah.
Kingsbury seems to slow down the second half of the season. That someone charted it out. Every team he's been at, the second half of the season, the offense dips in production. So we'll see if they can keep the pace up. But we can move on to the next matchup on our agenda here, the Ravens at the Steelers. I picked the Ravens. Jeff, you picked the Steelers. Steelers ended up winning a really tight game, 18-16. Ravens easily could have won this if Tucker didn't miss a few kicks or a couple things went their way a little bit better, but you got it. I think it was a coin toss pretty much either way before the game even started, but both quarterbacks were managed to be kept in check. Derrick Henry was bottled up for a lot of this game and didn't produce like he had in previous weeks. That's tough Steelers defense. Najee was able to get some receiving work to supplement his lagging production on the ground game too. George Pickens took over this game with 8 catches on 12 targets for 89 yards. No touchdown for him though. Zay Flowers dropped a few big catches, which was pretty disappointing if you're a Zay Flowers fan. And Isaiah Likely took over the tight end role this week over Mark Andrews. So Mark Andrews was just looking stable again as a top tight end option, and Isaiah Likely stole the thunder from him. Jeff, what were your notes on this one? What did you think of this matchup?
So this week in the 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and 8 o'clock window on Sunday, they all had one great game each. This was the great game in the 1 o'clock window, and it was different than the other two games because this was a great hard nosed game where it's going to be close scoring each time. But I did say in the podcast last week, if Najee plays, the Steelers will win. And Najee played, the Steelers won. He got 93 total yards, which is nothing to scoff over in a Ravens versus Steelers game. So it's not easy to come by. We saw what King Henry did. I think he was in the 60s of yards, but also a rushing touchdown, so it saved his day from a fantasy perspective. But as you noted, a rough day for Flowers. You'd have to think better days are ahead for Zay Flowers.
Yeah, I think so. It looked like a few mental mistakes or just being off in his connection with Lamar. Lamar was running for his life from the Steelers quite a bit in this game. Overall, excellent matchup. Deontay Johnson blanked another week. He has one catch, I think, for 6 yards with his time in the last 3 weeks with Baltimore. Hopefully that changes going forward at some point, but at this point, he's kind of unplayable.
What if they're saving him for the postseason?
Doesn't help during the regular season, does it?
Secret weapon.
This would have been a game to implement him, but I guess he's just not there yet. I don't know.
I still think the Steelers are a top 5 defense, maybe even a top 3 defense in the NFL right now.
No, I agree with that.
So I think that goes a long way. All right. So we both have one win apiece so far going into this game here. And Alex, you're going to get your second win before I do. You picked the Saints. Saints won this game against the Browns. This was a Taysom Hill game. He had 3 touchdowns in this game, 1 interception as well that he threw, not that he got on defense. This was also a Jerry Jeudy game. So I know that you're a big Jerry Jeudy fan, but he did show up and show out in this game, which is a little surprising because into a daily play, I threw Cedric Tillman off of your recommendation, and that did not work so well for me this week. But hopefully there's better days ahead for Cedric Tillman. And then MVS scores again. It was just a short pass, but I think it's probably time to consider picking him up off the waiver wire. I know he's on bye this week, so you might be able to wait a week on that as well.
Yeah, Jerry Jeudy benefited from an 89-yard broken coverage touchdown. If it wasn't for that, he would have been a very mediocre play this week. So, kind of a situation where everybody knew the Saints' outside coverage was terrible, so the Saints compensated and shut down the outside, which Cedric Tillman plays predominantly. Most of his snaps on the outside, so he received more coverage. But that opened it up for Jeudy, and that play, that touchdown was straight up the middle, deep. And then Elijah Moore also had 6 catches, just like Jeudy, but 66 yards and a touchdown. So Elijah Moore had himself a day, and Njoku had himself a day. This was a Browns team that was playing from behind for a good portion of this game. I'm still upset that Taysom Hill is a thing still in this league, but kind of hard to ignore when he rushes for 138 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's a little frustrating being a Alvin Kamara owner that Alvin's not getting these touchdown opportunities, but Taysom Hill still effective, and in a lot of leagues you can play him as a tight end, which is very crucial this year with the struggling production that tight ends are having. MVS Marquez Valdez-Scantling, I think, is someone that you could speculatively add. He is a situational deep threat wide receiver, but 2 weeks in a row he has at least 1 touchdown. That's something to monitor, and something the Saints offense desperately needs with the injuries that they have there.
Absolutely. So we'll see if they can kind of keep up this interim coach little hot streak that they're running right now. All right. So I don't have anything else on this game, so we can hop over to the Packers at the Bears. Alex, do you want to break down this game for us?
Sure, this was a game we both picked Green Bay. Green Bay ended up winning. Granted, I think it was a illegal block formation that last play when Chicago was kicking a field goal, and I think Chicago probably deserved to win this game because Green Bay did not play that well down the stretch and allowed Chicago to stay in the game. I think that people should be very worried about Jordan Love. He never had a chance to get healthy. He's been playing on hurt leg injury, hurt knee injury since that game in Brazil. So I think this is a Green Bay team that they're going to be very competitive, but I don't know if should they reach the playoffs, I don't know how far they will get. Josh Jacobs had a pretty solid game actually this week. 76 yards on the ground and a touchdown, and he even had receiving work. So 4 receptions for 58 yards, which is about as good as you can ask for from the running back position. I'm just wondering with the workload they're giving him if he's going to break down at some point this season or not. I know they activated Marshawn Lloyd, but I don't think he's ready to play after having tendonitis, and Emmanuel Wilson only had 2 carries in this entire game. So workload for me would be a concern for him. Christian Watson, though, out of nowhere, had an enormous game for him. He had 4 catches for 150 yards, and Jaden Reed saved his week with a touchdown. Dobbs didn't do much. Wicks is afterthought at this point. If you still have him on your team, definitely drop him. Keep an eye on him for later, but you can't trust him at this point. For the Bears, it's kind of hard to figure out on the Bears side who you can play besides DeAndre Swift. Roshan Johnson vultured a touchdown in the red zone, and Caleb Williams held without a touchdown this week, but he did have 70 yards rushing, so it might be usable, but not great. I think Keenan Allen almost had a touchdown, but still not relevant. I don't know what to do with this Bears team, Jeff. What do you think?
Well, you had to rub it in that Williams didn't score a touchdown. That was the last leg on my parlay that didn't hit this past weekend. But here we are with another game and another blocked field goal at the buzzer for a win. So that's really interesting. But it does seem like Williams did perform better, and he did have a focus on DJ Moore, at least early on in this game, and that waned over time. And I don't really understand why, but still not a win. So they're still struggling a little bit. I mean, I've heard that Eberflus was guaranteed through 2025, but I have a hard time believing that he'll be the head coach in 2025. Like, it's just a hard one to sell to me.
And again, as I mentioned towards the beginning of the show, I think that they should have fired Eberflus over the offseason and gotten an offensive head coach when they were drafting a quarterback. And I think Caleb Williams would have greatly benefited from that. So kind of feels like we're going down a similar path with Caleb Williams as Justin Fields. So I'm very curious if he can keep this week's momentum going or if he'll fall back into bad habits again, having a defensive-minded head coach.
Absolutely. But we're back to the Fields and the Trubiskys and one and done coaches for rookie quarterback for the Bears.
Yeah, we'll see if history repeats itself soon. But we can move on to the next matchup here, and that is the Colts at the Jets. We both picked the Jets before the Anthony Richardson news dropped. I don't know if that would have changed your mind, Jeff. I don't think it would have changed mine. But Richardson had one of the best, he had his best game since he's been in the league in this matchup, and the Colts ended up winning 28-27. And in this game, Richardson had 272 yards, 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions. He had a 66.67 completion percentage, Jeff, which you thought was impossible. And Jonathan Taylor didn't do much in this one, but Josh Downs had a good week. Alec Pierce remains in the conversation on a weekly basis. He seems like he always gets a long pass that keeps him relevant. Michael Pittman did get targeted in this. Adonai Mitchell should have had a bigger game than what he had. I know he had a nice play that didn't end up counting. The Jets, however, Rodgers had a decent game despite how it seemed when watching the game. It seemed like the Colts defense played pretty well. Brees Hall had one of his better games this week than he's had pretty much all season. He got 2 touchdowns total and over 100 yards combined as well. Devontae Adams having a relevant week with 72 yards off of 6 receptions. Garrett Wilson, not so much. I don't know if this is good enough for the Jets going forward or if they somehow need to bring out more points. Jeff, what did you think of this matchup?
So the Colts, they swapped to Anthony Richardson late, which before our picks last week. So that was a little bit of a surprise for us because they gave Joe Flacco a ringing endorsement the day before they went to Anthony Richardson. So it's kind of a interesting turn of events, but he led him to a victory. Brees Hall did put up some stats. He did look like a stud on a bad team right now. And I have to ask you, is Josh Downs now the number one wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts?
Would say he's the most productive wide receiver on the Colts, but he had 3 less targets than Pittman, who still had the most targets on the team. Pittman's still the guy. Pittman's ailing. Josh Downs is a very good wide receiver, though. I would say Adonai Mitchell's the most athletic. Pierce is pretty close to Adonai Mitchell. Pittman's the most polished of them. Josh Downs is kind of in between. So he is very productive. He's pretty fast. He's pretty nifty, especially in the slot. So he's playing very well this year.
Absolutely. Speaking of Pittman and Alling, Higgins also Alling, and I know we have that bet, and it looks like Higgins now has a 21.2 point lead, and Higgins has missed like 4 games this year, so that is
I
pretty
don't think
crazy.
Higgins I don't think Higgins could play through a back issue.
No, I don't think he would, especially on the tag.
I think Pittman is a tougher wide receiver. He's a possession wide receiver. Whereas Higgins benefits from playing across from Jamar Chase. I don't think Higgins is close to the caliber wide receiver that Pittman is. And it's
Yeah,
just different situations. It's not like Pittman has Joe Burrow throwing him the ball either.
no, but he also has competition across the way. But also, um, I feel like if Pittman didn't get extended this last year and played on the tag, he wouldn't be playing through this back injury.
Yeah,
He'd be trying to get 100% healthy for the offseason.
that's true.
So, I mean, that does matter. These players will take care of themselves if the team doesn't take care of them.
Yeah.
All right, we both got a loss on that one. That one was a little bit surprising. I don't think I would have changed my pick if I knew Anthony Richardson was playing, but they followed the Kyler Murray script from the week before, and it worked just the same. All right, so we can move on to the Jaguars at the Lions. Your boys, the Lions, destroyed again. They look like the NFC team to beat right now. In Monty and Gibbs and St. Brown and Jamison Williams, they all eat on this day. But before I let you gush about the Lions, which we both picked the Lions, we both won this game. The Jags are lost, and Mac Jones just isn't good. So, I mean, those two are facts right now. What did you make of this matchup here?
The Lions curb stomped the Jaguars basically in this matchup and took out all their frustration from the last couple weeks out on the poor lowly Jags. So Goff, after throwing 5 interceptions and barely squeaking by with a win against Houston last week, 412 yards through the air, 4 touchdowns, 0 turnovers. And he even had 4 rushes for 21 yards, which he's not the most mobile of quarterbacks, which was one of the reasons why the Rams were okay trading him a few years back. I thought the Lions played about as good as you could. I think you could make an argument that maybe they ran up the score a little bit too much, but I don't really care about that. If you had one of these players on your fantasy team, then you greatly benefited from it, and it worked out quite nicely. They even had Hendon Hooker out there to get some reps. The Jaguars are a complete disaster. I don't know how Doug Peterson has kept his job so far. Mac Jones has not looked good. He's had like maybe a couple plays where he was okay, but the vast majority of his plays, not so much. That makes ETN almost unplayable. Bigsby, if he was healthy, might be playable, but I don't know. Brian Thomas Jr. is probably the only one that is playable because he has big play potential. And that's about it. I mean, if you're doing a pick 'em, you might start picking against the Jaguars every week if you haven't already been doing it, just because it's going to be difficult to see them get another victory for most of the year.
Yeah, I mean, they're a team that I'm going to pick against. They might be able to beat the Titans if they play them again, but that might be about it. But the Detroit running up the score, I hope they know what they're doing, and I hope it doesn't come back to bite them later. We all know that karma has a way of working itself out later, so if they get the score run up on them one time, just remember how hard they played against the Cowboys after the whole incident with the linemen scoring last year and losing like in week 16, 17, or 18 last year. And there's going to be teams that play them in the next couple of years that are going to want to give the Lions some payback. So there's expression out there, keep your words and your actions soft and sweet just in case you have to eat them. So,
Well, as of this moment, it's hard to envision the Jaguars being able to do that.
well, they don't play him for another 4 years, so they're lucky on that front. But
Well, I'm not scared of Trevor Lawrence. I don't think the Jaguars will go anywhere with Trevor Lawrence at the helm or Doug Peterson as the head coach. One of
well,
those has to change, maybe both of them.
yeah,
But
Lawrence really can't because of the extension that they gave him. But Peterson feels like his clock is ticking. Like I expected him to actually be let go yesterday, but that didn't happen.
I think there's some teams out there regretting extending some of their quarterbacks now. We got the Giants with Daniel Jones first and foremost. Obviously Cleveland with Watson. I think that a lot of teams are regretting it. Maybe the Jaguars will begin to regret Trevor Lawrence. Cowboys maybe will regret Dak Prescott, especially if they're in position to take a certain quarterback this year. But Detroit's not one of them. So let's move on to his former team, the Los Angeles Rams at the New England Patriots. And this was a much closer game than I think we thought it was going to be. We both picked the Rams. Rams did in fact win 28-22, but I thought Drake May played fairly well in this matchup, and Ramondre Stevenson put up some decent points this week. No touchdown, but decent yardage. Hunter Henry almost had a bigger game. He seemed like he was the lead target for this team. And I think that Kendrick Bourne is starting to separate himself of late as the nominal wide receiver one for this team, which I don't think he's a wide receiver one type guy, but they don't have much. The Rams, Stafford played very well, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 295 yards. This was kind of the sweet spot for him. Finally, just 27 attempts, which I think is should be where how they use them each week. They shouldn't overuse them, and they finally got a ground game going with 24 rushes, so kind of a more of an even split, which is what we talked about last week. Puka Nakua and Cooper Kupp were hyper effective this week, only catching 7 and 6 receptions each, but both over 100 yards. Both of them had a touchdown. Cooper Kupp had two. This is the offense that I thought that they would be for the season, and I hope that they keep this up. I think that New England's season, they're not going to go anywhere, but it's nice to see some spark from the young quarterback, and hopefully New England can build on this next year.
Absolutely. And I think that as we hit down the stretch here, some of the receivers will be usable in your fantasy playoffs. You'll have to just decide if it's Bourne or UT or Douglas. You'll have to pick and choose, or Hunter Henry. But I think they could be fantasy usable. I'm impressed with the Rams here because they did travel across the country and played a 10 a.m. body clock time game. So, and they were still able to not be totally flat. So that's pretty cool. And it looks like both Nakua and Cup are going to eat in this offense. And as long as Stafford could spread the ball to those two, incorporate Parkinson, Robinson, I guess it's going to be Stafford and Sons pretty soon here, but and incorporates Johnson and a few others. but I think the Rams here are poised to potentially make a run for the playoffs. Potentially.
Yeah. But I think that they'll stumble into the playoffs, is my guess.
Yeah, it's just going to be extremely challenging given that the Commanders have 7 wins, the Packers have 7 or 8 wins, and the Vikings have, I think, 9 wins right now. So just feel like it's gonna be hard unless they win that division. Right. So we both got that one right. And speaking of getting games right, we got the next game right here where we both picked Miami and they easily beat the Raiders. Dolphins looked really good lately, and it looks like Tua is on a tear since returning. And the Raiders have no run game, but Brock Bowers appears to be the one lone bright spot here for the Raiders. Thoughts on this game? I don't really have a ton because this one was as expected.
Uh, um, Tua played okay, but every week I feel like he risks getting his head hit. He always does something. I feel like everything he does, he leaves by his head. So kind of concerned about that still. Achan got pretty bottled up. I haven't seen the explosiveness that we saw his rookie year. I don't think I've seen that much of it this year. So I still feel like Miami's offense is kind of broken. But Jonnu Smith is now tight end number 9 on the season, which is not something I thought I would say this year. Maybe a few years ago, I would have thought Johnny Smith could potentially be top 9. But here we are. Tyreek Hill finally did something. Brock Bowers is every week starter. I think he's the number 1 guy for the Raiders. But the Raiders, to me, are a team. If the Cowboys don't go after Dion and Shador Sanders, the Raiders are a team that could do both. I could see them wanting to go to Vegas. It wouldn't be as far a move from Colorado as moving to the other side of the country. They're going to have a high draft pick. They need a quarterback. They already have a assembled defense. I could definitely see them going after Deion Sanders and Shador Sanders as head coach and quarterback. So that's something that I would keep an eye on. I know you prefer to wait until the offseason, but I think that is a spot for them. But their season's over. Miami's season is close to over, but Miami's still staying alive so far.
Yeah, I think that they have a shot for the last wild card spot. I think that the Bengals have a shot for the last wild card spot, even though you don't see it. But those are the two teams that I would assume would be in the driver's seat for that last spot over the Broncos, who will run out of steam shortly, and the Colts with they're trying to figure out what they have in Anthony Richardson right now.
Bengals are in one of the hardest divisions in football right now, and they have a losing record. It's going to be hard for me to see them beat the Steelers or beat the Ravens at this point. I mean, they can do it, but it's an uphill battle for most of the rest of the season for them, I feel like. Whereas Miami, they play the Jets, they play the
So
Patriots,
so
and
Miami
they
plays at Green Bay and at Houston, and they host San Francisco. All 50-50 matchups at best for them. And that would put them at best 9-7 if they lost all 3 of those and didn't lose another game. Whereas the
yeah,
Bengals play Pittsburgh at home. They play Dallas on the road, which should be an easy win. They play Tennessee on the road, should be an easy win. They play Cleveland at home, they play Denver at home, and then they go on the road the last week in Pittsburgh.
okay. Miami plays New England, and they play the Jets twice, and they play Cleveland. So those seem like they could get 4 victories there. If they manage to beat a struggling Green Bay team, or a struggling Houston team, or a struggling San Francisco team, they're in my
Yeah.
opinion. They may get in with an 8-9 record the way the AFC is right now.
Well, I think Cincinnati goes 5-1 over the last 6 games.
That's gonna be a
So
tall task.
they'll beat Pittsburgh at home. They'll beat Dallas on the road. They'll beat Tennessee on the road. They'll beat Cleveland at home. They'll beat Denver at home. And they'll probably lose to Pittsburgh on the road the last week.
The way the Bengals have struggled, I wouldn't put it past them to lose the majority of those games. And I love Joe Burrow. I love Jamar Chase. I love Chase Brown. The defense has been underperforming, in my opinion, kind of broken there, honestly. But with how out of his mind Joe Burrow has played and the fact that he's still losing games, I don't know how they can make the playoffs. And I think that matchup against Tennessee is going to be harder than people think it is. Tennessee has, in my opinion, a top a top five or at least a top 10 defense in the league right now. It's going to be very difficult to pull some of this off. And I don't think that you can say that they'll for sure beat the Steelers. The Steelers are a very good team with a very good defense, and it's definitely not a guarantee to beat Cleveland just because Cleveland has been bad this year. They play very well against division opponents every single year, even when they're bad. So it's not a given. I want the Bengals to make it because I think that they should be a good enough team to make it. It's just the schedule has not worked out for them and they've underperformed a lot in some regards.
We'll see. I don't see any of those teams that I mentioned being able to keep up with the Bengals scoring. And you might talk about defenses, but they played a really good defense this last week, and they were able to put up points and score against them. Just they happen to play an offense that's able to score points and put up points against them. And I don't think Will Levis and Cooper Rush and maybe even Russell Wilson will be able to put up points the way that Joe Burrow will. Anything else on this matchup with the Dolphins and the Raiders, now that we're debating the Bengals here?
So let's talk about the Vikings at the Titans, Jeff. We both
Absolutely.
picked Minnesota. We both were correct. They ended up winning 23-13. What were your takeaways for this matchup?
So Darnold bounces back after a rough performance. He's actually looking better. They're easing in TJ Hawkinson, which is totally fine. I think with 9 wins, I believe the Vikings have. No, they have 8 wins right now. They're 8-2. At worst, I see them going 2-5 the rest of the season, which gets them 10 wins and probably into the that. So I think the Vikings are heading towards a playoff run, so they just want to have Hawkinson 100% for a playoff run. And then we move over to the Titans side here, and Levis looks decent, doesn't do anything crazy good or crazy bad in this game. And then it looks like Calvin Ridley is startable in fantasy going forward. I didn't see this coming, and it's been a pleasant surprise of the DeAndre Hopkins trade.
I just want to clarify for the Titans, their top 10 defense yardage wise. They've allowed a lot of points and they're not getting sacks or turnovers, but yardage wise, they've done a really good job at slowing down teams.
I don't know how you can slow down the Bengals these days.
Yeah, it seems like they always get someone open for a deep bomb with the way
The
their offense is
the
set up.
the dam eventually breaks, and it did against the Chargers, and they should have won that game if McPherson. Well, we'll get to that later. You're making me stick up for the Bengals. I don't like this.
uh, I think that Darnold did okay. Obviously, I agree with you there. Tennessee has a decent rush defense. We're able to bottle up Aaron Jones and Cam Akers. Nick Westbrook, I think, is someone to pick up off waiver wires. I think he's had several weeks in a row of production, so it's worth bringing up, especially coming up to next week by Mageddon Part 2. I think you might, if you need someone for a wide receiver position, he's probably on the waiver wire. But I don't really have that much else to add for this matchup. Tennessee run game was non-existent, and Spears got I think, a concussion in this one. So they're in some dire straits, and I think they're going to be reeling going into the next week a little bit.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. We will see if the Titans can bounce back next week, and if the Vikings can keep this forward momentum going towards a postseason run. Right,
All right,
Falcons
Jeff.
at
Let's
the Broncos, and I'll let you go ahead and get this started because this is one of your favorite quarterbacks in the league now. This is like your new Joe Burrow. You've already traded him in.
I have not traded. Well, until Joe Burrow fixes his hair, then I'll go back to him. But
It's
frosted tips
fixed.
right now. The frosted tips are not doing it for me now.
Well, I'm gonna have to frost my tips for next week.
Yeah. We're now entering the terrible, no good afternoon picks for me. You picked Denver, I picked Atlanta, which kind of feels like a reversal. But I thought Atlanta, for sure, at some point is going to start winning games. They're in danger of losing their first place in the NFC South if they don't get things turned around. Denver is playing very well despite having very little weapons. But Javonte Williams, after everyone thought he was losing his starting role to Audric Estime, has an exceptional game. Bo Nix has another exceptional game. He really looks like he is at least in the top two or three conversation for his rookie quarterback class, and he looks like he could have been a steal going as the what was it the what fifth quarterback, sixth quarterback actually in the first round because it was Williams, Daniels, May, Penix, and then what's his face with Minnesota McCarthy, JJ McCarthy. Yeah.
You got it.
So, being the sixth quarterback taken, he looks like he is at least top two with Jaden Daniels right now. Potentially better than Jaden Daniels because Jaden Daniels started hot and might be fizzling out now. Nick started off slow and struggling and is red hot right now, despite having not much to work with and being in a very tough division. So, we're going to be watching these two for Rookie of the Year the rest of the season, and we'll see how that shakes out. But Denver won this game. They won big. It seemed like at no point in this game was Atlanta ever really in it. Cousins wasn't terrible, but certainly wasn't good. Penix got some play at the end of this game. Ground game didn't get going at all with Bijan. Interestingly enough, Algier didn't seem to touch the ball at all other than one catch for -1 yards. Pitts didn't get going. Drake London was the only one who got something out of this week. It seems like Mooney couldn't even get anything going. Denver just played exceptional football. So they look
Absolutely.
like
That's why
they're
I
a
picked
team
them.
they're gonna make a wild card.
No, I think they fizzle out towards the end of the year. I actually think that the Bengals versus Denver game in week 16 or 17 is for the last wild card spot. And we'll see who can win that game. I have trouble with Denver keeping up with a team like the Bengals and scoring that many points at will.
Don't know, man, because while I kind of agree with you on the offensive side, Bo Nix could probably run for 270 yards and 3 touchdowns at this point. So who knows? That's a exaggeration there, a little hyperbole. But schedule wise, they've got the Raiders, Cleveland, Indianapolis, the Chargers, Cincinnati, and Kansas City the very last week of the season, which Kansas City may decide to rest their starters. We don't know. But the Chargers, like Indianapolis, Chargers, and Cincinnati seem like all three of those teams will be competing with Denver for wild card spots. Any one of those could be a deciding factor for any of those four teams. I wouldn't put it past Denver potentially beating the Chargers. That'll be an interesting matchup. All three of those will be interesting.
You
The next
love
2 weeks,
betting against the Chargers. It's like your favorite
they're
thing to do now.
they are overperforming based off of what their roster is. I think Herbert's playing out of his mind. I think Harbaugh's done an exceptional job first year coaching for this team. I don't know if they can go the distance, but it's going to be interesting because they might very well win a whole bunch of games and dominate going into the playoffs. But I just feel like they're not a team that can go the distance the way the personnel is right now. I think they're
No,
overperforming.
I think they're going to get into the playoffs. I think even they're going to win a playoff game. And the only reason I think that is because their physicality is something that translates well to the postseason. So I don't know how Harbaugh took the same roster as last year and made this team like 100 times more physical than it was last year. Like essentially the same roster as last year. Like
Yeah.
And now
but
they're a physical team.
I think they've had a decent amount of easy games so far this year. They lost their tougher games and they won against bad teams, losing record teams for the most part. Even Cincinnati was a losing record team, but they're about to play Baltimore, Atlanta, Kansas City, Tampa Bay, and Denver all back to back, which is kind of a gauntlet there. But they'll finish up with New England and Las Vegas. It will be a soft finish there going into potentially playoffs. I just think they might struggle the next 5 weeks.
We will see. All right, I'm going to take my victory and we're going to move on to the next matchup here, and it's the Seahawks at the 49ers. Alex, what's going on with the 49ers right now?
I wish I could tell you. Their offense it hasn't seemed to click since McCaffrey came back. Obviously, they're missing Brandon Ayuk, but Ayuk wasn't playing that well even when he was out there due to holding out in the offseason. Debo Samuel hasn't been able to be a focal point of this offense. I think the only people playing well right now, also Kittle was out this week. I think if Kittle was in, might have made enough of a difference. But the only three players when all are healthy that are playing super well, in my opinion, are Brock Purdy, Jawan Jennings, and Kittle. I think Brock Purdy played pretty well this game. Should have been enough to potentially win, but both defenses stepped up. I don't think that Seattle should have won this game. They Kenneth Walker was misused in this matchup. I think he should have had a bigger game. I think he should have had at least 2 touchdowns. He did get one, but why they put Zach Charbonnet on short yardage situations in this game, I don't know, because that made zero sense. Charbonnet should have been more of a pass catcher in this game, with Kenneth Walker getting that short yardage work, but Geno Smith getting the last second score in this game to get the lead and win the game. It's pretty impressive. I mean, that's really all I have to say about that.
Yeah, is it possible that Kenneth Walker was dealing with like an element that they didn't want to use him in short yardage, hitting the hole, getting hit right away type situations?
Well, if you can't get him to do that, then I'm surprised he played at all.
Yeah, I'm just saying that would make the most sense. Like there was a reason why they went sharp, short yardage, unless that was to give the illusion that they could potentially pass. I don't know. But so is JSN the number one wide receiver in Seattle now? And is Jennings the number one wide receiver in San Francisco now?
It seems that effectually they have been the last few weeks. I don't know if Seattle is souring on Metcalf or if coverage is dictating where they go with the ball, but they have three wide receivers and they can't seem to feed all three. And JSN has been getting the benefit for the most part the last few weeks. Jennings, I think, is maybe someone that they should have just traded away Brandon Ayuk if they had known that they were going to get the production that they are from Jennings. I think though the way that it is right now, Jennings seems to pop up whenever they're missing a cog in that offense. So anytime Kittle's out, Jennings explodes. So if Kittle's out again, Jennings is someone you should start. Absolutely.
For sure, and it looks like Debo is very disappointing with Ayuk out now. So what we were talking about last week about them potentially moving on from Debo, they might do that anyways based on performance and what he brings to the table at this point in his career.
All right. Not a fun game for us. San Francisco lost. Like I said, at the very end. There are a lot of close games this week that could have gone either way. But Jeff, well, the next couple matchups here, you got over me. So let's go ahead and talk about the Chiefs at the Bills. And I will just let you go on and on about this matchup.
Yeah, so we have death, taxes, and Bills beat the Chiefs in the regular season. Those are foregone conclusions in life. But the last two times that the Bills beat the Chiefs in the regular season, the Chiefs did go on to win the Super Bowl. So let's see if there's that three-peat happening here. But Josh Allen down the stretch took over this game, and his touchdown run at the end sealed it. basically made it a 2-possession game. And Patrick Mahomes went ahead and threw an interception on the very next drive to seal it, which I think he has 11 interceptions through 11 games this year, 10 or 11 games this year. So that seems like a little bit excessive for Patrick Mahomes. And Xavier Worthy had a decently big game, but it could have been much, much bigger if he could have gotten that second foot in bounds with a wide open bomb from Patrick Mahomes to Xavier Worthy. It looked like he was still playing by the college rules, so hopefully he can get that together down the stretch. Chiefs are lacking offensive weapons, so I don't know if Kelsey, Hopkins, and team will be enough to win a third Super Bowl, but they did just snag Tyquan Thornton off of the Patriots, from the Patriots, who was released a couple weeks ago. He's on the practice squad right now. If he gets up to speed and can contribute, that could help them quite a bit this year as well. But go Bills. They did win this game, and I got it right, and you didn't, Alex. Anything I missed on this matchup?
I think that there's two things that Kansas City is missing right now, and I never thought I'd say this, but I feel like they're sorely missing Rashee Rice at this point. Seemed to be the most reliable upside wide receiver that they had. Hopkins brings some of that reliability. Worthy should have some of the athleticism, but neither one of them really bringing out what people hope for. Kelsey seems like a shell of himself. I think he's aged out just about. But I think the other thing, and probably the more important player, is Isaiah Pacheco. I know I believe they activated him last week, but he wasn't quite ready for this one. As soon as he's back and healthy enough to play, I think the Chiefs will be able to control the game more. But Patrick Mahomes, past few years, has gotten at least 12 interceptions. I think this will be year 4 in a row, and he's not really been the same quarterback since Tyreek was traded. I think at the trade deadline, potentially they should have traded for Tyreek again, bring him back to the team, and kind of open it up, because right now Mahomes is struggling and Tyreek is struggling, floundering around with the Dolphins over there in Miami. Oh, it's a little fish joke right there. Anyway, I think that they could have been reunited. Missed opportunity, at least for fantasy.
That's absolutely true. I do think that Patrick Mahomes and even the Chiefs get bored in the regular season now. They know they're going to the postseason already, so I think sometimes there's, just throw it up type throws.
All right, Jeff, let's move on to the Sunday night matchup, which was a very exciting back and forth game, and that was the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Los Angeles Chargers in LA. You picked the Chargers, I picked Cincinnati. The Chargers, in fact, won. It seemed that the odds of the winner changed like 27 times in this game. It seemed like it seesawed back and forth. Feel like there were tons of missed calls, some on both sides. But there was one particular drive that annoyed me, that it was like 3 penalties against the Bengals in a row, and kept the Chargers going. I think the Chargers eventually got a touchdown
I
on
think
that
a field
drive,
goal on
which
that drive.
they kicked the field goal. Well, they
Yeah, it was
shouldn't
at
have
the
been
end of the
able to.
half. Yep.
Whatever. Anyway, you prematurely celebrated a Quentin Johnston touchdown. Said he looked great, and then he didn't catch a pass the rest of the game. I think when the game's on the line or conversions needed, Herbert finds McConkey. I think McConkey has twice the amount of catches as the next wide receiver on the list for the most part here, and I think he has the most yardage. I think he's the best wide receiver. I think Quentin Johnston's a situational downfield threat, but they seem to find ways to scheme him open where no defenders around him and he catches the ball either for a big gain or for a touchdown. I think that's definitely usable in fantasy. Still waiting for his game to evolve a little bit more, but he has 6 touchdowns 11 weeks into the season, which is nothing to scoff at. Very situationally usable. J.K. Dobbins still seems to be the go-to running back for LA. Chase Brown seems to be great for Cincinnati. I know a lot of people are trying to tell you to sell now. I don't know if you should sell now. I think Chase Brown is a good running back, and I think he will be good next year too. I think he's earning his way to the permanent job. Both quarterbacks, obviously incredible. And Jamar Chase, another huge week for him. Kind of hard to ever bench him. T. Higgins came back in full force in this one. He had that nice wide open 42-yard touchdown pass, and on top of that, he brought in another 100+ yards receiving, total of 9 catches. So they both look great when they're both out there. This is an offense that should win games, and they're struggling right now, but they've played a lot of tough opponents. And kudos to the Chargers for pulling this one out.
Absolutely. I was a little nervous on my pick when the Sunday Night Crew was
Every one of them
hype.
picked the Bengals.
Well, they were hyping up the fact that this is a must win for the Bengals, and then I was thinking like it is a must win for the Bengals. Like they
That's
can't
why I
lose this
picked them.
game, but I
That's
didn't
why I
waver.
picked them. Yeah.
I picked the better team. I picked the better coach, which I don't think that's even debatable with the coaching part there. But
I think the coach is better. I think the quarterbacks are very, very close. I think the Bengals offense is better, obviously, but the Chargers are more well-rounded. They're a more balanced team.
so if you put Chase and T. Higgins on the Chargers, they're a Super Bowl contender. Yes or no?
Yes, I would
Because
think so.
they're so close with that defense, and they're probably one weapon short away from a long run. Man, for year one, this is very successful for Harbaugh and Herbert.
I agree. I know a lot of people whispered about it going into the season, but I'm still surprised, especially considering who their running backs are with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards and how that's worked out for Baltimore. And by that, I mean it didn't really work out with Baltimore. And how I feel about Quentin Johnston, and I don't think Josh Palmer is as good as people have made him out to be or whispered about. They've overperformed. They've had Bosa, who has missed a few games this year, hasn't looked like himself. They have Mack, who is getting older as a defender, but this defense has played very, very well so far. Um, However, this is one of the teams that can score points, and I think that the Chargers' defense has played a lot of bad teams so far. I think their defensive stats will come down, especially over the next 5 games where they have really tough matchups. But that just might mean they might be a top 15 defense instead of a top 10 or top 5 or whatever, which is still above average and still good. I think they're missing pieces on defense. I think they're missing pieces on offense, but they are very close to being a Super Bowl contending team.
I love it. I love it. Imagine that you get a grown-up coach in the room, and your quarterback all of a sudden flips a switch into the top 7 mode. We'll go conservatively top 7.
Or like the number one thing that he brings is like his positivity and his way to motivate players, which gets them in the right frame of mind because it's a stark difference from the last few coaches where it seemed like they got a little too serious or too grim. And I think that's been one part of a major difference. And then I think um, Harbaugh and Greg Roman combined are a good team for that offense. Roman by himself or away from the Harbaughs is not the same coach, and they've done very well on defense. Just much better coached, much further ahead of what I thought for them. Kind of
And I
similar to the
know,
Broncos, though. Knicks.
yeah, and I know we have Herbert for passing yards as a bet. He's currently on pace for 3,716 yards, which I feel like you would have said is more than you would have thought he would have been on pace for this year
Well,
as well.
I originally said like 3,800.
Okay. Did you
So
cut him
that's
down?
like spot on. And you granted me extra yardage, which you shouldn't have, but
Nope.
I appreciate that.
Yep. But we'll see. There's still some season left, and there's probably a big game in Justin Herbert's wheelhouse still to be had.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
but I still don't know if it'll be enough to get him over the top, so we'll see. But that brings us to the last game of the week, and Alex, I'm going to let you take your turn to gloat here because your hometown Houston Texans beat your despised rival, the Dallas Cowboys. And we both got this one right, but Alex, what did you notice in this game here?
Well, in-state rival. They're not in the same division or conference, as you should all know. But I said last week that I would be very upset if the Texans lost this matchup the way that the Dallas season has gone. Struggled in the first half, but figured it out in the second half. Joe Mixon totaled 3 touchdowns in this one. He basically willed Houston to win this game. Stroud was okay, not as good as I would have wanted. Nico Collins almost had a first quarter touchdown, almost had another touchdown later where he was stopped close to the line. But Joe Mixon has I feel like Joe Mixon has done better for Houston this year with a horrible offensive line than he has almost any year with the Bengals, which is really strange for me. I'm very glad that he's with the Texans. I'm very glad that he's working out. Well, I just wish the Texans' offensive line could resolve its issues, and I wish that Stroud would have a cleaner pocket to be able to throw down the field. Cooper Rush for the Cowboys surprised me. He actually threw for 354 yards and a touchdown and an interception. Granted, he threw 55 times. This is a team that committed to Rico Dowdle as the number one running back and then only ran with him 10 times. Their offense is horrendous, especially without Dak, and it was bad with Dak this year. Lamb managed to salvage something this week. 8 catches, 93 yards, but no touchdowns. Really no one else that you started this week for the Cowboys or potentially would start for the Cowboys did anything, and Jake Ferguson got knocked out of this game, may or may not play next week. So kind of a mess for the Cowboys. Sloppy game, but strong finish for the Texans.
Agree, and I believe Dallas should have played Trey Lance in this one. That's my only other note. I do think Mixon, as you mentioned, running should be helping. I think he's making the offensive line look better than it is, which is even scarier that that's the case.
I agree. I think he's on pace right now of getting maybe 200 or 300 more yards than he ever got with Cincinnati.
Absolutely.
All right, well, that does it for this episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you all for downloading and listening to this episode, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please leave us a comment and share the show. Every little bit helps.
You can find us on all podcasting apps by searching N2E Fantasy and with our handle at N2E Fantasy on all social media platforms. Please join our community and give us a follow. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember, it's truly never too early for fantasy football. Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.